The temperature was -22 degrees when Sarah Mitchell's car died on the abandoned Montana highway, her cell phone showing no signal, and the last house she'd passed was 17 miles back. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the handprint on her frosted window, a small child's handprint, appearing from the outside, even though she was completely alone in an endless white wilderness, or so she thought. What happened next, along with 2 other true accounts of winter terror, will make you question everything you thought you knew about those dark, frozen months when the world goes silent and something ancient wakes up in the cold. These aren't campfire tales. These aren't urban legends passed down through generations. These are 3 documented events that happened to real people in the depths of winter, events that changed them forever, events that prove some horrors don't hide in summer's heat, but wait patiently in winter's frozen embrace. Stay with me, because by the end of these stories you'll understand why some survivors never speak of winter the same way again, and why the cold is so much more than just a drop in temperature. It's a doorway to experiences that defy explanation and haunt the soul long after the snow melts. Sarah Mitchell had driven the Montana highways 1,000 times in her 34 years. She was a traveling nurse, accustomed to long stretches of empty road, comfortable with solitude, prepared for winter's worst with emergency supplies, blankets, and a satellite phone that had never failed her. Until December 18, 2019, when everything she thought she knew about preparation, about safety, about the very nature of reality itself, shattered like ice under pressure. She had left Great Falls at 4 p.m., heading toward a small clinic in Shelby where she was covering a night shift. The forecast called for light snow, nothing concerning for someone who'd driven through blizzards. But forecasts, Sarah would later learn, don't account for everything. They don't predict the inexplicable, they don't warn you about the impossible. The car trouble started subtly, a slight hesitation in the engine, a flickering dashboard light. Sarah wasn't worried. She was only 30 miles from Shelby, and the road, though empty, was well maintained. Then, without warning, the engine died completely. The dashboard went dark, even her headlights extinguished, plunging her into a darkness so absolute it felt like being swallowed. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Don't panic. Assess the situation, take action. She tried the ignition, nothing. She reached for her cell phone, no signal, which wasn't unusual in this area. She grabbed her satellite phone from the glove compartment, the one that had cost her $400 specifically for emergencies like this. Dead, completely dead, even though she'd charged it that morning. The temperature outside was -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the car, without the heater, it would drop rapidly. Sarah had maybe 3 hours before hypothermia became a real danger, even with her emergency blankets. She wrapped herself in layers, pulled on her heavy parka, and tried to think clearly. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost convinced herself it was the wind, but there was no wind. The night was perfectly, unnaturally still. The sound came again, a soft tapping, like fingernails on glass. Sarah's heart began to hammer. She turned on her flashlight, one of 3 she kept in her emergency kit, and swept the beam across the windows. Nothing. Just endless white snow and darkness beyond her small circle of light. The tapping stopped. Sarah exhaled slowly, telling herself it was just the car settling, metal contracting in the cold. She'd read about that. It was normal. Everything was fine. Then the handprint appeared. It materialized on her passenger window slowly, as if being pressed from the outside in real time. Small fingers, a child's palm. The frost on the window made it perfectly visible, a clear impression against the white-covered glass. And it was definitely coming from outside. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She aimed her flashlight at the window, but the beam showed nothing beyond the glass except falling snow that hadn't been falling moments before. No child, no person, nothing that could have made that print. But it was there, undeniable, impossible to rationalize away. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice cracking. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" Silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, another handprint appeared on the rear window. Then another on the driver's side rear window. Then the back windshield. Small hands, a child's hands, pressing against every window of her car as if someone, something, was circling the vehicle, leaving its mark. Sarah's rational mind screamed that this was impossible. There was no one out here. She would have seen footprints in the snow. She would have heard approaching footsteps. But her instincts, the ancient part of her brain that had kept humans alive for millennia, screamed something else entirely. You are not alone, and whatever is out there is not human. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop even further. Sarah could see her breath coming in rapid white clouds. Her hands shook, and not just from cold. Should she get out? Look for whatever, was out there. The thought of opening the door, of exposing herself to the negative 22-degree night and whatever was circling her car, made her stomach clench with primal fear. Then the handprints began to appear on the inside of the windows. Sarah screamed. It was involuntary, ripped from her throat by pure terror. Frosted prints materialized on the interior glass, overlapping the exterior ones, as if invisible hands were pressing from inside her locked car. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the driver's door, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the windows, where more and more prints appeared. "Stop!" she shouted. "Stop it! What do you want?" The prints stopped appearing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Sarah's breathing was ragged, her heart pounding so hard she could hear blood rushing in her ears. Then, on the windshield directly in front of words began to form in the frost. Not written with a finger, but appearing letter by letter as if being exhaled by an unseen mouth. "Help us." Sarah's terror transformed into something else. Confusion mixed with desperate compassion. "Help you?" she whispered. "Help who? Where are you?" The temperature dropped again, impossibly colder. Sarah's flashlight flickered. And then she saw them. Not with her eyes, but somehow in her mind, images flooding her consciousness with overwhelming clarity. Children. 7 children, lost in a blizzard on this very road. She saw a school bus sliding off the highway, tumbling down an embankment. She saw the driver dead, neck broken. She saw children, terrified, crawling from the wreckage into a whiteout blizzard. She saw them huddling together for warmth, crying for parents who couldn't hear them. She saw them, one by one, succumbing to the cold. The vision released her, and Sarah gasped for air, tears streaming down her face. "When?" she asked the empty car. "When did this happen?" More words formed on the windshield. 1983. Sarah's mind raced. 1983, 36 years ago. She tried to remember if she'd ever heard about a school bus accident on this highway, but Montana was vast. Accidents happened, and not everything made national news, especially decades ago. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked. "Why now?" The handprints began to fade, but new words appeared. "Tell them." "Tell who?" "Tell them what?" "Tell them we're here. Tell them we want to go home." Understanding crashed over Sarah like a wave. These children had never been found. Their bodies were still out there, somewhere off this highway, buried under decades of snow and earth. Their families had never had closure. They'd never been laid to rest properly. And somehow, impossibly, their spirits remained, trapped in this frozen corridor, reaching out to anyone who might hear them. "I'll tell them," Sarah promised, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, I'll tell them. I'll make sure you're found. I'll make sure you go home." The car shuddered once, as if something heavy had lifted from it. Then, impossibly, the engine turned over. The dashboard lights blazed to life. The heater began pumping warm air. Sarah's hands shook as she put the car in gear, but before she drove away, she grabbed her phone, which now showed full signal, and marked her exact GPS coordinates. She made it to Shelby 20 minutes later and went straight to the police station instead of the clinic. The officer on duty, a weathered man named Douglas Peterson, listened to her story with increasing skepticism until she mentioned 1983 and a school bus. His face went pale. "The Whitefish Canyon incident," he said quietly. 7 children from a church group. The bus went missing during a Christmas trip. They searched for weeks but never found it. The families, some of them still live in the area. Still waiting. Sarah gave him her coordinates. The next morning, despite a fresh snowfall, a search and rescue team found the ravine she'd marked. 30 feet down, buried under decades of accumulated snow and frozen earth, they found the rusted remains of a school bus. Inside were 7 small skeletons, still huddled together, still wearing the winter coats they'd died in. The discovery made regional news. 7 families finally got to bury their children. 7 names: Timothy, Marcus, Jennifer, Susan, David, Patricia, and little Emma. Only 6 years old. were finally laid to rest in the Whitefish Cemetery under a monument that read, "Lost but never forgotten." Now finally home, Sarah attended every funeral. She met the families, now elderly, who had spent 36 years wondering what happened to their children. She held hands with Timothy's mother, now 78, who wept and thanked her for giving her peace before she died. She watched as 7 small caskets were lowered into the ground and felt a presence, warm despite the December cold, surrounding her like an embrace. That night, alone in her hotel room, Sarah looked at her car in the parking lot. The windows were clear. No handprints, no messages. Just a normal vehicle covered in fresh snow, but she knew what she'd experienced was real. 7 children had been trapped between worlds, unable to move on until someone heard them, until someone brought them home. Sarah still drives the Montana highways. She's still a traveling nurse, but now, on December 18th every year, she visits the Whitefish Cemetery. She brings flowers for 7 graves and stands in the winter cold, remembering the night when the impossible became real, when terror transformed into purpose, when she learned that some spirits don't haunt out of malice but out of desperate, aching need. And she's never afraid of winter roads anymore, because she understands now that even in the darkest, coldest nights, there can be purpose in fear and redemption in horror. Hashtag Story 2. The Cabin in the Woods, Minnesota, January 2016. Marcus Chen thought he knew what isolation meant. As a wildlife photographer specializing in winter landscapes, he'd spent weeks alone in remote locations, comfortable with silence, at peace with solitude. But January 2016 taught him the difference between being alone and being watched, between isolation and imprisonment, between peaceful solitude and the kind of terror that comes from realizing you're not at the top of the food chain. Marcus had rented a cabin 70 miles northeast of Duluth, deep in the Superior National Forest. It was rustic, no electricity, no running water, heated by a wood stove. But it was perfect for his project, capturing the raw beauty of a Minnesota winter. He planned to stay for 3 weeks, long enough to document the landscape through different weather conditions and light. The first week was paradise. Marcus photographed frozen lakes under pewter skies, captured the intricate patterns of ice formations, documented the silent beauty of snow-covered pines. He saw wildlife, deer, a fox, even a lynx one morning that made his professional heart soar. He ate simple meals, read by lantern light, and slept deeply in a way he never could in the city. The second week started differently. Marcus woke on day 8 to find tracks around the cabin. Large tracks, canine but bigger than any dog he'd seen. Wolf prints, probably, which made sense for the area. Minnesota had a healthy wolf population. Marcus was thrilled. Wolves were notoriously difficult to photograph, and having a pack nearby might give him the opportunity of a lifetime. He set up cameras at strategic points around the cabin and waited. That night he heard howling, but it was strange. Not the harmonizing pack vocals he'd heard in documentaries, but a single voice, sustained and oddly pitched, almost like a human scream, stretched impossibly long. Marcus told himself he was being fanciful. Wolves could make all sorts of sounds, nothing to worry about. Day 9 brought more tracks, and this time they circled the cabin multiple times, as if whatever made them was pacing, studying the structure. Marcus checked his cameras but found nothing, no images, as if the animals had somehow avoided each frame. Frustrating but not impossible. Wolves were smart. That night, something scratched at the cabin door. Not tentative, curious scratches, but deliberate, methodical gouges that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. He grabbed his flashlight and camera, determined to finally capture his elusive subjects. When he opened the door, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, he saw nothing, just snow and trees and darkness. But the scratches on his door were deep, fresh, and definitely not made by anything small. Day 10 was when Marcus started to feel genuine fear. He woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of something on the roof, heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth, back and forth. Wolves didn't climb on roofs. Bears were hibernating. Marcus lay in his sleeping bag, paralyzed, listening to whatever it was walk the length of the cabin repeatedly, as if measuring, as if planning. When dawn finally came, Marcus went outside to investigate. In the fresh snow on the roof were prints, but they made no sense. They started at one edge of the roof with no ladder marks, no tree close enough to jump from. They walked the roof in a perfect grid pattern, then disappeared at the other edge, again with no indication of how whatever made them got down. Marcus decided to leave. This was beyond unusual wildlife behavior. This was threatening, and he wasn't stupid enough to ignore his instincts. He packed his gear, loaded his truck, and turned the key. Nothing. The engine didn't turn over, didn't even click. He tried again. Nothing. He popped the hood and found his battery was completely corroded, cables eaten through as if by acid, even though he'd checked everything before driving up and the truck had been fine 3 days ago when he'd last used it. Marcus stood in the snow, staring at his disabled truck, and felt true fear creep up his spine. He was 70 miles from Duluth, with no vehicle, no cell service, and something was very, very wrong. He could hike out, but 70 miles in winter conditions, alone, was dangerous. He decided to use his satellite phone to call for help. But when he pulled it from his pack, he found it shattered. The screen broken into spider web patterns, even though it had been safely stored and he'd seen no damage. He was trapped. Marcus returned to the cabin and barricaded the door. He had 2 weeks of food supplies, a wood stove, and water from the nearby creek. He could survive until his rental period was up and the property owner sent someone to check on him. That was 10 days away. 10 days of whatever was out there. That night, the stalking began in earnest. Marcus heard footsteps circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. He heard that scream howl, again, closer now, right outside the walls. He heard scratching at multiple points simultaneously, as if several creatures were coordinating. And then he heard something that stopped his heart. A voice. Marcus. His name, spoken in a tone that was almost human, but not Q. "Uite." The syllables drawn out too long. "Marcus, come outside." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Fear had stolen his voice. The voice came again, this time from a different side of the cabin. "Marcus, we know you're in there. Come play with us. Us." There was more than one. Marcus grabbed his hunting rifle. He'd brought it for protection but never imagined actually using it. His hands shook as he loaded it. Whatever was out there, it spoke. It knew his name. This was beyond wolves, beyond any animal. The scratching intensified, and Marcus heard wood splintering. They were trying to get in. He fired a shot through the door, the blast deafening in the small space. The scratching stopped. Silence, then laughter. High-pitched, childlike laughter from multiple sources surrounding the cabin. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back to the wall, rifle across his lap, listening to things circle his cabin, call his name, scratch at the walls. When dawn finally came, the noises stopped. He cautiously looked outside and saw hundreds of tracks, but they weren't wolf prints anymore. They were human footprints, bare human footprints in the snow, circling the cabin in intricate patterns that made his eyes hurt to look at. Days 11 through 15 blurred together into a nightmare of sleepless terror. Whatever they were, they only came at night. During the day, Marcus saw nothing, heard nothing. But every night, they returned. They called his name in voices that sounded like children one moment and ancient the next. They scratched at the walls. They threw things at the cabin, rocks, branches, once something heavy that cracked a window. Marcus stopped eating. He could barely drink water. His hands shook constantly. He considered making a run for it, trying to hike out. But every time he looked at the door, he remembered that voice saying, "Come outside," and knew that's what they wanted. They were hurting him, trying to drive him out. On day 16, Marcus found writing in the frost on the inside of his window. He hadn't heard anyone enter. The door was still barricaded, but there, in his own cabin, written from inside, were the words, "Tomorrow night." Marcus's mind broke a little then. He laughed, high and hysterical, because what else could he do? Tomorrow night what? Tomorrow night they'd get in. Tomorrow night he'd die. The uncertainty was almost worse than a clear threat. Day 17 Marcus spent preparing. If they were coming in, he'd fight. He barricaded every window, reinforced the door, created weapons from tools, an axe, knives, the rifle loaded and ready. He wrote a letter explaining everything, hoping someone would find it, hoping his death would at least be documented. But when night fell on day 17, something different happened. Marcus heard vehicles, actual real vehicles approaching the cabin. He nearly wept with relief. The property owner had come early, or someone had gotten worried. He rushed to unbarricade the door, threw it open, and saw 3 snowmobiles pulling up with 5 people. The property owner, a woman named Janet, took one look at Marcus and her face filled with concern. "Oh my God, what happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus tried to explain, the voices, the tracks, the stalking. But as he spoke, he saw the looks exchanged between the rescue party. Concern shifting to worry, not about what he was saying. "Worry about him, Marcus," Janet said gently. "There are no tracks. Look." Marcus turned and looked at the snow around the cabin. Pristine, untouched except for the snowmobile tracks and his own earlier footprints. No hundreds of prints circling the cabin. No evidence of anything approaching the building. The scratches on his door were gone. The cracked window was intact. "But they were here," Marcus insisted. "Every night they called my name. You've been alone out here for 17 days, one of the EMTs interrupted. "In extreme isolation in winter conditions. Do you know what that can do to the mind? Cabin fever, hallucinations, auditory delusions." "I'm not crazy," Marcus shouted. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Had it all been in his mind? The stress, the isolation, the endless darkness? Had it created monsters that didn't exist? They took Marcus back to Duluth. Doctors examined him, severe sleep deprivation, malnutrition, acute stress reaction. They said he'd experienced a psychotic break brought on by isolation. They prescribed rest, therapy, medication. They were kind but firm. What he'd experienced wasn't real. Marcus wanted to believe them. He tried to believe them. But 3 things haunted him. First, his battery cables had really been corroded. The mechanic confirmed it and couldn't explain how it happened so quickly. Second, his satellite phone really was shattered, and he had no memory of dropping it. Third, when they brought his belongings from the cabin, he found something in his camera bag that he knew hadn't been there before. A child's drawing, done in crayon on birch bark. It showed a cabin surround, dead by stick figures with 2 long limbs and wrong-shaped heads, and at the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for playing with us. We get so lonely in the winter." Marcus never went back to wilderness photography. He sold his equipment, moved to downtown Chicago, and now he only shoots urban landscapes. He never tells anyone the full story. But every winter, when the temperatures drop and the nights grow long, he remembers. He remembers voices calling his name. He remembers things that might have been hallucinations, or might have been something older and stranger than psychiatric explanations allow. And he keeps that birch bark drawing locked in a safe deposit box, a reminder that sometimes the line between madness and the supernatural is thinner than we'd like to believe, and that winter darkness can hide things that science has no name for. Story 3, The Frozen Lake, New Hampshire, February 2021. The Anderson family, Tom, Linda, and their 14-year-old daughter Emma, had rented a lake house in New Hampshire for February break. It was supposed to be a healing trip. Emma had been struggling with anxiety and depression, and her therapist had suggested family bonding in a peaceful environment might help. The lake house, owned by Linda's college friend, seemed perfect. Quiet, beautiful, and isolated enough to provide real rest. They arrived on February 12, 2021, to find the lake completely frozen, a vast sheet of white ice stretching nearly a mile across. Tom, an avid ice fisherman, was thrilled. Emma, who had barely spoken during the 4-hour drive, looked at the frozen expanse with something that might have been interest, the first emotion she'd shown in weeks. "Can we go out on it?" Emma asked, her voice quiet. Linda hesitated, but Tom was already nodding. "Tomorrow morning we'll set up an ice fishing tent. It'll be fun, Em, like when you were little." That night, as they unpacked, Emma stood at the large window overlooking the lake. Linda joined her, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Pretty, isn't it?" "There's something on the ice," Emma said. Linda peered out into the darkness. Security lights from the house illuminated maybe 50 feet onto the frozen lake, but beyond that was just darkness. "I don't see anything, honey. Out there." Emma pointed to the center of the lake, where the darkness was absolute. "Something's moving." Linda squinted but saw nothing except shadow and ice, probably just the light playing tricks. "Come help me make dinner." Emma turned away from the window, but Linda noticed her daughter's eyes kept drifting back to the lake, as if watching for something. Day 1 on the ice was wonderful. Tom set up the fishing tent, drilled holes, and taught Emma how to use the fish finder. They caught nothing, but it didn't matter. Emma smiled. She laughed. For brief, precious moments, she seemed like the girl she'd been before depression had stolen her light. Linda watched from the shore, taking photos, feeling hope bloom in her chest. As the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the ice, Emma stood and walked to the edge of the tent. "Dad, do you see that?" "See what, kiddo?" "There's someone out there." Emma pointed toward the center of the lake. Tom stood, shading his eyes. The setting sun made visibility difficult, but he could have sworn. Yes, there was a figure, dark against the white ice, maybe 100 yards away, just standing there, motionless. "Probably another fisher," Tom said, though something about the figure's stillness bothered him. "Hey," he called out. "You okay out there?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "Let's pack up," he said, "getting too dark anyway." As they gathered their equipment, Emma kept watching the figure. "Dad, it's getting closer." Tom looked up sharply. She was right. The figure was maybe 70 yards away now. Definitely closer. But he hadn't seen it move. It was just nearer. "Come on, Em. Now." Tom's voice was sharp, urgent. They grabbed what they could and hurried toward shore, leaving the tent and some equipment behind. Tom told himself he'd come back for it tomorrow, but even as he thought it, he knew he was lying. When they reached the house and looked back, the figure was standing exactly where their tent had been. In the fading light, Tom couldn't make out details, but the shape was wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, proportions that didn't quite make sense. "I don't want to go back out there," Emma said, and her parents, exchanging worried glances, quickly agreed. That night, Emma woke Linda at 2 a.m. "Mom, it's calling me." Linda, groggy and confused, tried to focus. "What's calling you, honey?" "The thing on the lake. It knows my name. It wants me to come outside." Linda's blood ran cold. She got out of bed and went to Emma's room, which overlooked the lake. The full moon illuminated the ice in silver-white light, and there, clearly visible, was a figure standing on the ice directly in front of the house. "Tom!" Linda's scream brought her husband running. All three of them stood at the window, staring at the impossible figure that shouldn't be there, that definitely hadn't been there when they went to bed. "I'm calling the police," Tom said, grabbing his phone. But there was no signal. He tried the landline. Dead. He tried his cell phone, Linda's, even the Wi-Fi. Everything was down. "It wants me," Emma whispered. "It's been waiting for me." "No one's taking you anywhere," Linda said fiercely, pulling her daughter close, but Emma felt rigid in her arms, trembling. They watched the figure for hours. It never moved, but somehow, imperceptibly, it got closer. By 4 a.m., it was halfway between the center of the lake and the shore. By 6 a.m., it was at the ice's edge, just 20 feet from the house. When dawn finally came, the figure was gone. Tom rushed outside to look for footprints, evidence, anything. He found tracks in the snow at the ice's edge, bare human footprints, impossibly clear, as if someone had walked there recently. But they appeared suddenly, with no trail showing where they came from, and they led to the lake's edge, then continued onto the ice in a straight line toward the center, until they simply stopped existing about 30 feet out. "We're leaving," Tom announced. "Pack, now." But their car wouldn't start. Neither would Linda's SUV. Both vehicles completely dead, batteries drained, though they'd been fine yesterday. They were trapped, and something on the ice knew it. Day 2 was worse. The figure appeared at noon, standing on the ice in broad daylight. Tom could see it clearly now, and he wished he couldn't. It was shaped like a person. But the proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, head too large, body too thin. And it wore what looked like old-fashioned clothes, though everything was the same color, white-gray, like ice given form. Emma couldn't stop staring at it. "It's lonely," she said. "It's been alone for so long, it just wants company." "Emma, stop," Linda begged. "Don't listen to it. You hear it too?" Emma turned to her mother with eyes that seemed too old, too knowing. Linda hadn't heard anything, but the way Emma said it made her realize her daughter was hearing something they couldn't. "What is it saying, baby?" "That winter is eternal under the ice. That cold is peace. That if I come to it, I'll never hurt again." Emma's voice was dreamy, distant. "It's not wrong, Mom. I do hurt, all the time, and it's offering me peace." Terror like Linda had never known gripped her heart. This wasn't just some strange phenomenon. This thing was targeting her daughter, speaking to her depression, weaponizing her pain. "Emma, listen to me." Linda grabbed her daughter's face, forcing eye contact. "That's not peace, that's death. That thing is using your pain against you, but your pain is temporary. It will get better. I promise you, it will get better." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "What if it doesn't? What if I always feel like this? Then we fight it together, every day, every hour, if we have to. But you don't give up, and you definitely don't listen to some frozen thing that wants to drag you under ice." Tom had been frantically trying every form of communication, radio, emergency signals, even writing help in the snow. Nothing worked. They were completely cut off. As the sun began to set, on day 2, the figure moved closer again. That night was endless. The figure stood outside the house, right against the window. Tom, Linda, and Emma huddled together in the master bedroom, as far from the windows as possible. They heard tapping on glass. They heard a voice, soft and seductive, calling Emma's name. They heard promises of peace, of rest, of an end to suffering. Emma rocked back and forth, hands over her ears. "Make it stop. Please make it stop." Linda held her daughter while Tom barricaded the bedroom door with furniture. They knew it was useless. If this thing wanted in, furniture wouldn't stop it. But they had to do something. At 3:33 a.m., the voice changed tactics. Instead of calling Emma, it spoke to Tom and Linda. "She's in so much pain. You know it. You see it every day. Let me take it away. Let me give her peace. You love her, don't you? Then let her go." "Shut up!" Tom roared at the empty room. "Shut up! You're not taking our daughter." But the voice persisted, insidious, working its way into their exhausted minds. "Wouldn't it be easier? Wouldn't it be kinder? She's suffering. We can end it. We can give her eternal winter where pain doesn't exist." Linda felt her resolve wavering and hated herself for it. Because part of her, the part that had watched her vibrant daughter fade into depression, the part that felt helpless against an enemy she couldn't fight, whispered that maybe the voice had a point. Then Emma spoke, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "No." The room went silent. Even the voice stopped. "I said no," Emma repeated, standing up. "I've been depressed. I've thought about dying. I've wondered if everyone would be better off without me. But you know what? I'm 14 years old. I haven't even lived yet. I haven't fallen in love. I haven't traveled. I haven't figured out who I'm supposed to be. And yeah, I'm in pain now. But pain isn't permanent. Nothing is permanent. And I'm not letting some ice monster take my future because I'm having a hard year." The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, spreading in intricate patterns that looked almost like reaching hands. The voice came back, angry now, demanding, "Come to me. You promised. You belong to winter." "I never promised you anything," Emma shouted back. "And I don't belong to winter. I belong to myself." The house shook. Windows rattled. Tom and Linda grabbed Emma, holding her between them, forming a human shield. And then Linda understood. This thing fed on despair, on depression, on the darkness that sometimes swallows people's minds. It had found Emma when she was vulnerable, had been whispering to her maybe for weeks, preparing her. But Emma's declaration, her choice to live, to fight, to claim her own future, that was anathema to it. "We need to get her away from the lake," Linda said urgently. Now while she's fighting it, they bundled Emma in layers of clothing, grabbed flashlights, and Tom picked up the tire iron from his emergency kit. If they couldn't drive, they'd walk. It was 12 miles to the nearest town, but they'd make it. They had to. As they opened the front door, the figure was there, right there on the porch, close enough to touch. And Linda finally saw it clearly. It was made of ice and frozen flesh, human once but not anymore, preserved and twisted by decades, maybe centuries, of cold. Its eyes were empty white, its mouth a frozen grimace, and when it reached for Emma, Linda swung her flashlight with all her strength. The flashlight passed through the figure like it wasn't there, but in that moment of contact, Linda felt its history flood into her mind. A girl, 16 years old, drowning under the ice in 1823, calling for help that never came, freezing, dying, being preserved by the unnatural cold of the lake, and over 200 years twisting into something else, something that lured others into the same fate, collecting souls to keep it company in the frozen depths. Linda staggered back, the vision breaking. The figure moved toward Emma, but Emma stood her ground. "You were a person once," Emma said, and her voice broke with compassion. "You were scared and alone and you died horribly. I'm sorry that happened to you, but you can't have me. You can't have anyone else. It's time to let go." The figure stopped. For a moment it seemed almost confused. "Let go," Emma repeated gently. Stop hurting others. Just let go." The figure looked at Emma with its empty white eyes, and Linda saw something in its frozen face, recognition maybe, longing. And slowly, impossibly, it began to weep. Frozen tears that melted as they fell. "Find peace," Emma whispered. "You don't have to be this anymore." The figure reached out one last time, but not to grab, just to touch Emma's face gently, carefully, like a mother blessing a child. Then it turned and walked back toward the lake. Tom, Linda, and Emma watched as it moved across the ice, getting smaller, more distant, until it reached the center. Then it simply sank into the ice as the frozen surface had opened to reclaim it. The moment it disappeared, sound returned. Their phones buzzed with missed messages. The cars started. The world came back to life. They left immediately, driving through the pre-dawn darkness to a hotel in town. The next day, Tom contacted Linda's friend who owned the house. She was shocked to hear their story, but not entirely surprised. "The locals won't use that lake in winter," she admitted. "There are stories going back generations. A girl who drowned under the ice in the 1800s. They say she sometimes comes back looking for company. I always thought it was just local legend." Emma spent the next year in intensive therapy. She processed her depression, worked through her suicidal ideations, learned coping strategies and resilience. It was hard work, but she did it. And whenever she felt like giving up, she remembered that night when she chose life, chose her future, chose to fight. 4 years later, Emma is 18, about to start college. She's pursuing psychology, hoping to help other teenagers struggling with depression. She still has hard days, but she has tools now, support, and an unshakable knowledge that she's stronger than her darkness. She never goes near frozen lakes in winter. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, she thinks about the figure that tried to claim her, and she hopes that when Emma told it to let go, to find peace, that somehow it did. That somewhere, a 16-year-old girl from 1823 finally stopped hurting and found the rest she'd been denied for 200 years. Because healing, Emma learned, isn't just for the living. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show compassion on to the very thing that tried to destroy you. The 3 stories, Sarah's encounter with the lost children, Marcus's stalking in the woods, and the Anderson family's battle with the frozen spirit, seem separate, unconnected events. But in the winter of 2022, Dr. Patricia Reeves, a folklorist and anthropologist from Boston University, noticed something that would tie them together in ways none of the survivors expected. Dr. Reeves had been researching winter supernatural phenomena for her book Ghosts of the Frozen Months, a study in seasonal hauntings. She'd collected hundreds of stories from across North America, most of them easily dismissed as folklore or misidentified natural events, but 3 cases, all documented, all involving credible witnesses, all occurring between 2016 and 2021, stood out because they shared unusual commonalities. She reached out to Sarah Mitchell first, tracking her down through the news reports about the discovered school bus. Sarah, now working as a nursing supervisor in Great Falls, was hesitant, but ultimately agreed to meet. "Why are you interested?" Sarah asked over coffee at a small cafe. "It's been 3 years. I've tried to move on. Because your experience matches a pattern I'm seeing," Dr. Reeves said, opening her laptop. "Look at this map." The screen showed North America with 3 points marked Montana, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. 3 states, 3 experiences, 3 different types of encounters. But they all happened during extreme winter conditions. They all involved some form of supernatural communication, and they all had, this is going to sound strange, they all had a purpose. Sarah leaned forward, interest. "Ted," despite herself, "what do you mean, a purpose? The children who contacted you wanted to be found. They needed you to help them go home." That's not malicious haunting. That's communication with purpose. Dr. Reeves pulled up another file. In Minnesota, a photographer named Marcus Chen reported being stalked by entities in the woods. I tracked him down. He wouldn't talk much, but he did send me this. She showed Sarah a photo of a birch bark drawing, stick figures surrounding a cabin. Those figures he thought were tormenting him. I think they were trying to engage with him, but he was too frightened to understand. They left him a message thanking him for playing with them. That's terrifying, Sarah said. Or lonely, Dr. Reeves countered. What if they were spirits of children who died in those woods decades ago? What if winter is the only time they can manifest, and they just wanted someone to acknowledge them, to know they existed? Sarah thought about the handprints on her windows, the message, "Help us." So you're saying winter, what? Opens some kind of door? I'm saying winter creates conditions, extreme cold, long darkness, isolation, that thin the barrier between our world and whatever comes after. And I think certain spirits, especially those who died in winter, can cross that barrier more easily when conditions match their death state. Dr. Reeves opened a third file. This is the Anderson case from New Hampshire. A family was trapped in a lake house by a spirit that tried to lure their teenage daughter under the ice. But here's what's interesting. According to Emma Anderson's statement, the spirit didn't just want to kill her, it offered her peace. An end to suffering. And when Emma showed it compassion, when she told it to let go and find peace, it did. Sarah's eyes widened. So these aren't just random hauntings, they're, what, souls still tied to their trauma? Exactly. And they manifest when conditions are right, reaching out to the living in the only ways they know how. Sometimes it's terrifying, sometimes it seems malicious, but maybe, at their core, they're just desperate for connection, for resolution, for someone to finally see them and help them move on. Sarah sat back, processing. The 7 children she'd helped find, they hadn't haunted her again after being buried. They'd gotten what they needed and moved on. So what do we do with this information? Dr. Reeves smiled sadly. We document it. We help people understand that not every supernatural encounter is something to fear. Some are opportunities to heal wounds that have been open for decades or centuries. Some are chances to show compassion to suffering that predates us. Sarah thought for a long moment. Then she said, I want to help, however I can. What those children taught me, that there's purpose in fear, that we can help even the dead find peace. It changed my life. If there are others out there experiencing this kind of terror, maybe we can help them understand it, instead of just being traumatized by it. Over the next 6 months, Dr. Reeves, with Sarah's help, contacted both Marcus Chen and the Anderson family. Marcus was reluctant at first, still insisting his experience had been a psychotic break. But when Dr. Reeves showed him the patterns, the similarities to Sarah's experience, something in him shifted. I've spent 6 years convincing myself I was crazy, Marcus admitted during a video call. It was easier than accepting that something impossible had happened. But if it wasn't just me, if there's a pattern, then you're not crazy, Dr. Reeves finished gently. You encountered something that science doesn't have vocabulary for yet. But that doesn't make it less real. The Anderson family was most forthcoming. Emma, now 17, had been in therapy for years and had processed her experience extensively. The thing that tried to take me wasn't evil, Emma said during their interview. It was in pain. It had been in pain for 200 years, and it was trying to share that pain in the only way it knew how. When I showed it compassion instead of just fear, when I acknowledged its suffering, that changed something. Tom Anderson added, we researched the lake's history after we got home, found records of a girl named Charity Whitmore who drowned in 1823 when she fell through the ice while skating. Her body was never recovered. After Emma's encounter, the locals said they hadn't seen the Lady of the Lake since. It's like Emma helped her finally move on. Dr. Reeves compiled all 3 cases, plus 17 others that fit the pattern, into her book. But more importantly, she established a research network, a way for people experiencing winter supernatural phenomena to reach out, to get help understanding their experiences, to connect with others who had survived similar encounters. Sarah became an informal counselor for the network, using her nursing background and personal experience to help others process their encounters. She spoke with a truck driver in Alaska who'd been guided to safe. Thank you through a whiteout blizzard by voices he couldn't see. She counseled a family in Maine who'd been visited by an elderly spirit seeking to pass a message to her great-grandchildren. She helped a search and rescue worker in Colorado understand that the angels he kept seeing at disaster sites might be spirits of the lost helping him find others. Marcus eventually returned to photography, but with a new focus. He began documenting sites of historical winter tragedies, places where people had died from exposure, avalanches, blizzards, and in his photographs, strange things sometimes appeared, orbs of light, shadow figures, faces in the snow. He created an exhibit called Winter's Witnesses, displaying both the beauty and the haunting nature of the cold months. The Anderson family started a foundation focused on teenage mental health, using their experience to talk openly about depression and suicide prevention. Emma spoke at schools about her battle with depression and her encounter with the spirit, using both experiences to illustrate that darkness, whether internal or external, can be faced and overcome with courage and support. In 2023, the Research Network organized a winter solstice gathering at a retreat center in Vermont. Survivors from various winter supernatural encounters came together to share their stories, support each other, and honor the spirits who had touched their lives. Sarah stood before the group of 40 people and said, "3 years ago, I thought I was going to die on a frozen highway in Montana. Instead, I learned that even in our darkest, coldest moments, there can be purpose." 7 children used what little power they had left to reach out, to ask for help, to finally go home. They taught me that we're all connected, the living and the dead, the past and the present, and they taught me that showing up, being brave enough to listen, being willing to help even when you're terrified, that's what makes us human. Marcus spoke next, his voice still carrying traces of the trauma he'd experienced. "I spent years denying what happened to me because it didn't fit into my understanding of reality. But reality is bigger than we think, stranger, more wonderful and terrible than we imagine. Whatever was in those Minnesota woods, whether it was spirits of lost children or something else entirely, it was real. And pretending it wasn't real only hurt me. Accepting it, trying to understand it, that's what helped me heal." Emma was the last to speak, and at 17 she was the youngest person in the room. Depression makes you feel alone. It makes you think no one understands, no one cares, nothing will ever get better. The spirit that tried to take me used those feelings as a weapon. But here's what I learned. You are never as alone as depression tells you. There are people who will fight for you. There are reasons to keep going, and sometimes the darkest experiences teach us the most important lessons. That spirit was in pain for 200 years because it never let go, never found peace, never moved forward. I refuse to live that way. I refuse to let pain define me, and I hope my story helps others make the same choice. The gathering ended with a ceremony where each survivor lit a candle and spoke the name of the spirit or spirits they'd encountered. Sarah named the 7 children, Timothy, Marcus, Jennifer, Susan, Dav, ID, Patricia, and Emma. Marcus named the entities in the woods, calling them the Forgotten Ones. Emma spoke the name Charity Whitmore, the girl who drowned in 1823 and finally found peace in 2021. And as they stood together, candles flickering in the December darkness, something profound happened. The temperature in the room dropped, but not frighteningly. It felt gentle, peaceful, like a winter breeze carrying gratitude. Several survivors reported seeing lights, soft, golden lights, moving among the candles. Others felt presences, gentle touches, whispers of thanks. Dr. Reeves documented it all, writing in her journal, "Tonight we witness the healing power of acknowledgement. By honoring the dead, by refusing to dismiss their reality, by showing compassion to spirits trapped by trauma, these survivors created a sacred space where healing became possible for both the living and the dead." This is the truth winter keeps teaching us, that cold preserves, holds, remembers, and when we're brave enough to face what winter shows us, we have the opportunity to heal wounds that span centuries. The network continues to this day, helping dozens of people each year process supernatural encounters that happen during winter months. Not all encounters are as dramatic as Sarah's, Marcus's, or Emma's. Some are subtle. A feeling of being watched that turns out to be a protective presence, a dream that provides closure about a long-lost relative, a moment of impossible warmth in deadly cold that saves a life. But each encounter reinforces the central truth that Sarah discovered on that Montana highway: we are not alone, even in our darkest moments. The barrier between life and death, between past and present, between the known and unknown, is thinner than we think. And sometimes, being brave enough to acknowledge that, to listen to what winter is trying to tell us, can change everything. Sarah still drives the Montana highways, but now when winter closes in and darkness falls, she doesn't feel afraid. She feels connected to something larger than herself, part of a story that spans generations. Every December 18th, she visits those 7 graves and tells the children about the lives that are better because they were finally found, the families who got closure, the peace that came from their courage to reach out. Marcus has returned to Superior National Forest 3 times since his terrifying experience. Each time, he leaves gifts at the site of the cabin, toys, drawings, things children might like. He's never experienced another supernatural event there, but he reports feeling a sense of peace in the forest now, as if whatever was there accepted his offering of acknowledgement and friendship. Emma is thriving in college, studying psychology with a focus on adolescent mental health. She carries a small piece of ice in a locket around her neck. Ice taken from the lake where she nearly died, preserved somehow, never melting. She says it reminds her that even the coldest moments pass, that winter eventually gives way to spring, that nothing, not pain, not fear, not trauma, lasts forever. The 3 survivors have become friends, united by their experiences and their commitment to helping others understand that winter's horrors often carry hidden gifts. They speak at conferences, contribute to Dr. Reeves's ongoing research, and make themselves available to anyone struggling to process a supernatural encounter. Because here's what they've learned: the universe is stranger and more beautiful than we can imagine. Death is not the end, but a transition. Suffering, whether in life or after death, deserves compassion. And the barriers we think separate us, from the dead, from each other, from the mysteries of existence, are more permeable than we dare to believe. Winter shows us this truth. In the cold and dark, when the world goes quiet and still, we can finally hear the whispers of those who came before. We can feel the presence of mysteries that daylight obscures. We can touch the edges of reality and discover that reality is far more vast than our small, warm, well-lit lives usually allow us to see. These 3 true winter horror stories are not tales of monsters or evil. They are stories of connection, compassion, and the courage it takes to face the unknown with an open heart. They teach us that what we fear most often needs our help, that what seems to threaten us sometimes just needs to be heard, that even in our darkest, coldest moments, we have the power to bring light and healing to ourselves and to others, even others who died long before we were born. So the next time winter closes in and darkness falls, remember Sarah, Marcus, and Emma. Remember that fear and wonder often walk hand in hand. Remember that being alone doesn't mean you're truly alone. And remember that sometimes, the most terrifying experiences are invitations to grow, to heal, to connect with mysteries that make us more fully human. Winter is coming, it always does, and when it arrives it will bring stories, spirits, and truths that the warm months keep hidden. The question is not whether you'll encounter them. The question is whether you'll have the courage to listen, to understand, and to respond with compassion instead of just fear. Because that's what these 3 survivors learned, each in their own terrifying way. Winter's greatest horror is not death or darkness or the unknown. Winter's greatest horror is the isolation that comes from refusing to believe, from shutting ourselves off from mysteries that want to connect with us, from letting fear prevent us from helping souls, living or dead, who desperately need someone to finally see them, hear them, and help them find peace. They sent handprints on frosted glass. They sent voices in the woods. They sent a figure on the ice. And 3 people were brave enough to respond, not just with terror, but with compassion. In doing so, they didn't just survive their winter horror stories. They transformed them into winter healing stories. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth of all, that we have the power to transform our darkest experiences into sources of light. our greatest fears into our deepest compassions, and our most horrifying encounters into our most profound healings. Winter remembers, winter preserves, winter teaches. And when we're brave enough to learn what winter offers, we discover that even horror can become a gift, and even the dead can show us how to more fully live.